Barclays, shame, shame!
Barclays, Barclays, shame, shame!
All the crimes in your name!
Please check the label and do not buy items which say produce of Israel. Sale of which are funding the genocide in Gaza, they fund the occupation and the illegal settlements in the West Bank.
מי שיחרים אותנו מוחרם בעצמו. בשנים האחרונות קידמנו בארצות הברית, ויש כבר ברוב המדינות שם, חוקים שמי שמחרים את ישראל נענש בעצמו. אז זה לא יעזור להם, אנחנו לא מתרגשים מזה, ואנחנו נלחמים בזה.
The BDS movement deliberately asks public bodies to treat Israel differently from any other nation on the globe. East's only democracy as a pariah state. The founder of the BDS movement, Omar Barghouti, has been clear in his opposition to the existence of Israel as a Jewish state.
No country on earth claims a right to exist in a specific political form except Israel. Exist as what? As a settler colony? As an apartheid state? The South African regime had no right to exist as an apartheid state. Neither does the Israeli regime have a right to exist as an apartheid state. States' political systems don't have rights to maintain an exclusionary, supremacist, racist domination regime against another people. That is illegal in international law.
There has been sort of a targeted attempt to imply or suggest that BDS is motivated by anti-Semitism. And I think that that is something that came out very clearly in this debate, sort of taking and shifting this debate into this idea that, BDS is about being anti-Jewish, which it just isn't. It's not true.
This far-right, basically leaning government is becoming so authoritarian and anti-democratic that if it passes this law, it can use it as a template against the climate justice movement, the racial justice movement, against trade unions. With increasing social mobility against injustices, this government wants to shut down basically all this protest. And the best way, the easiest way to do it, start with the Palestinians, start with BDS. They see us as the weakest link.
BDS, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement, is a Palestinian-led, non-violent movement founded in 2005 with the support of 170 Palestinian civil society organisations. Modelled on the South African anti-apartheid campaign, it calls for an end to Israel's occupation, equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, and a resolution for the Palestinian refugees of 1948. Israel has declared the BDS movement a major strategic threat and has spent millions combating what it calls attempts to delegitimize the Jewish state. In Israel's closest ally, the US, 37 states have now passed bills designed to penalize boycotts of Israel, while Europe has also seen increasing pressure to introduce anti-BDS legislation. Today, even as protests grow in Britain and the world, demanding freedom for the Palestinians in the wake of the war on Gaza, the UK government is pushing ahead with a bill which will stop public bodies that want to stand in solidarity with the Palestinians from taking effective action to do so.
The BDS bill is actually called the Economic Activity of Public Bodies Overseas Matters Bill. That's how the government presented this. And it's part of a continuum of legislation that presents a serious threat to human rights.
In the 1980s, local councils played a key role in divestment from South African businesses as part of the anti-apartheid struggle. But the UK government wants to prevent them from playing a similar role today in the struggle against Israel's apartheid system and its blocking of Palestinian self-determination. If the bill is enacted, public bodies and bodies that receive public funding, specifically local councils and universities, will be forbidden from divesting from businesses or industries based on their own moral or political disapproval of the policies or conduct of foreign states.
BDS movement is very heavily targeted by Israel and its Western allies mainly, governments in the United States, UK, and most of Europe, they don't support Palestinian rights. Since BDS was launched in 2005, all Israeli governments treated BDS as a strategic threat. That's what they called the movement. Because they understand a movement based on human rights, a non-violent movement that is evoking the best legacy of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa can make a difference, and indeed is making a difference. Not just at the level of grassroots boycotts, academic boycott, cultural boycott, sports, and so on, but also at the institutional level, divestment. Major US churches, major trade unions in the UK, Canada, the US, South Africa, India, Brazil, and across the world have adopted divestment against banks and corporations that enable Israel's system of oppression, that enable settlements, occupation, ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. So Israel feels that this movement is unstoppable. There's nothing they've done that has succeeded in slowing down, let alone stopping the movement.
One of the biggest advocates for BDS in the UK is the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, who are a leading broad coalition of over 70 civil society groups to oppose the bill with a campaign called Right to Boycott. Although the bill is explicitly aimed at the BDS movement, its repercussions could extend to any attempt to divest from any business in any sphere if the UK government does not approve. Those opposing the bill all agree it is a threat to democratic freedoms and can negatively impact their campaigns on other issues, such as fossil fuel divestment. It's not the first time the UK government has tried to combat the BDS movement. Action has been taken by several UK councils, like Leicester City in 2014, to ban goods from Israeli settlements. Although the settlements are illegal under international law, these councils were smeared as anti-Semitic, and the UK government attempted to intervene by issuing guidance to local councils describing local boycotts as inappropriate.
The government initially in 2016, they introduced regulations that would stop local government pension schemes from divesting from companies that were complicit in Israel's violation of international law and Palestinian rights. And we took them to court, and we had a 4-year battle. Eventually, we defeated the government at the Supreme Court in 2020. But we won on the basis that the government did not have the power under UK law to do what it's trying to do. So one of the reasons why it's now bringing in this law is to give itself the power through Parliament to do what it wanted to do.
The world's media are here today. I want the President of the United States and I want Benjamin Netanyahu to see you, but most of all, I want Palestinians in their millions to see you.
So by trying to silence voices advocating Palestinian rights, this government is using us as guinea pigs, as a test lab, to pass repression against every progressive movement, especially trade unions. And I think most people realize that, and that's why opposition to it is massive in the UK. It might affect procurement and investment divestment by public bodies, universities, city councils, which is extremely dangerous. People might misunderstand this law as if banning BDS. It doesn't ban BDS. It doesn't make BDS illegal. It makes some aspects of BDS illegal.
The BDS campaign, where it has been adopted, where it has been endorsed, there have unfortunately been real community cohesion problems. Do you stand with us against anti-Semitism or not?
Gove's statement is ludicrous. It's offensive. It was incredibly concerning to watch. Like, the only way to fight anti-Semitism is to unconditionally support Israel. Not only actually misses the point on how we actually do address anti-Semitism, but it is fueling this narrative that, I think Jewish people in Israel are one and the same, which is not true.
The UK government has framed this bill as being about fighting anti-Semitism and protecting community cohesion. However, many, including Jewish activists, see this bill as politically motivated and say it will not do either. They believe the government is using Jewish people in a way that could put them at greater risk.
We don't combat anti-Semitism by oppressing or shutting down advocacy around Palestine. This is like a false equivalence that is about sort of opening the gate for an authoritarian, anti-democratic agenda and sort of positioning the struggle against anti-Semitism as necessitating us to sort of shut down civil liberties, shut down our collective rights to protest, accept or acquiesce like the oppression of Palestinian people is completely incorrect and false, and creates a really dangerous narrative that Jewish safety is in opposition to broader collective human rights struggles, in opposition to like free and democratic society, and could have really dangerous consequences, I think, for Jewish people in the UK.
Down with occupation, up with liberation. Now, ceasefire now.
And the government have conflated criticism of the human rights abuses by the government of Israel with anti-Semitism. And in our view, anyone should be allowed to criticize human rights in any country in the world without being tarred with the brush of racism. So criticizing human rights violations in Israel is no more anti-Semitic than criticizing human rights violations in India is anti-Hindu, or criticizing human rights violations in Myanmar is anti-Buddhist, or criticizing human rights violations in the Gulf states is anti-Islamic.
Days ago, UN experts said Gaza is running out of time. The 2.3 million Palestinians under occupation and siege in the Gaza ghetto are running out of life.
BDS is an anti-racist movement that opposes all forms of racism, including not just Islamophobia and so on, anti-Semitism. BDS has always rejected discrimination and racism against any group of people. There's so many Jewish supporters in the BDS movement, especially in North America, but increasingly in the UK and Europe as well, that play a very important role in our struggle for freedom, justice, and equality.
Many British and international legal experts have said not only will the bill violate Britain's international human rights obligations, but it also violates British law. Experts point out that it erases the difference in how the UK treats businesses in Israel with those operating in the occupied Palestinian territories, marking a serious departure from the current UK government policy. In effect, the bill will support businesses operating on stolen Palestinian land by protecting them from boycott and divestment initiatives.
It's quite an indictment on the UK government. They're pursuing a bill which their own lawyers, Foreign Office lawyers, have said would put the UK in breach of its international obligations, in particular in breach of UN Resolution 2334, which requires all states to separate their dealings with Israel from their dealings with Israel's occupied territories. And in particular, the UK says on the Foreign Office's website that Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories are illegal, they're a breach of international law, they stand in the way of a peaceful, negotiated two-state solution, and the UK doesn't encourage economic activity with settlements. And yet, in this particular bill, the UK has combined settlements and Israel into one clause of the bill, not making this important differentiation.
While the bill aims to stop public bodies taking action on issues the UK government doesn't approve of, some say it has another function too. This is to create a chilling effect by pushing the narrative that people who say they care about Palestinian human rights and don't want to be complicit in violating these rights are actually motivated by anti-Semitism. Therefore, the UK government is trying to foster an environment where people are dissuaded from taking action in support of Palestinian rights.
It is absolutely pernicious. It's an argument that has absolutely no foundation. And what it does, actually, it leaves or seeks to leave the Palestinian people uniquely unprotected. Let's look at the double standard being employed here. When Russia invaded and illegally occupied the Ukraine, our government, supported by all the mainstream political parties in the UK, took action, first of all, to employ sanctions against Russia, then to provide Ukraine with material support, including weapons, then to encourage public bodies, sporting bodies, to engage in their own boycotts. Nobody would argue that the motivation for that must be hatred of the Russian people. And the government says, no, we are motivated by concern for human rights and by the protection of international law.
Russian forces now encircle multiple Ukrainian cities after having destroyed much of their critical infrastructure, leaving people without water, without electricity, without access to food and medicine.
I completely support what Tony has said about protecting humanitarian corridors.
If a ceasefire and a proper peace plan is put in place, then of course it'll be right to look and see how those sanctions could potentially be removed if proper milestones are reached.
If that is true, then that standard should be applied consistently. And effectively what the government is doing is saying that the Palestinian people do not have the same rights as other oppressed people. They do not have the same rights as other people subject to military occupation. Ukrainians have the right to call on the world for support through boycott and divestment. The Palestinian people should be denied that right.
I think this bill will do the opposite of what Gove says in relation to community cohesion. I think it will fuel hostility and mistrust and division. You know, I imagine for a lot of these Arab and Muslim communities in the UK, the suggestion that their sort of support for Palestine is inherently anti-Semitic is a deeply offensive thing to hear.
As well as the chilling effect on effective avenues for solidarity with Palestinians, the bill goes even further. It will effectively criminalise free speech by making it illegal for members of public authorities to even express their support for boycott and divestment initiatives. By punishing supporters of boycott against such a clear case of apartheid and settler colonialism, the UK risks being once again on the wrong side of history.
I've never seen legislation before, Madam Deputy Speaker, that outlaws disagreement with the law. And breaching that sort of right to free speech, I think, is a really problematic step, that this legislation will send a chill through debate about a series of conflicts across the world, whether that is looking at Uyghur Muslims in China, the fate of Hong Kong Chinese, or indeed in Israel and Palestine.
It's an odd moment for a UK government to introduce a bill whose primary purpose is to shield Israel and any future Israeli government, including the current one, but even worse versions that might be heading our way, from any form of accountability, saying that it is Israel, above all states in the world, that needs to be given this unique protection.
My message to lawmakers who are looking at this bill as it makes its way through Parliament is that there is no amendment that can save this legislation. It is unworkable, it is immoral, and it must be rejected in its entirety. And that taking a stand in this moment is, will put you on the right side of history.
In the mid-80s, over 120 UK councils adopted initiatives in support of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. However, the Thatcher-led Conservative government fiercely opposed the boycott and sanctions movement against South Africa, and in 1988 passed the Local Government Act, which prevented other councils from imposing such boycotts, similar to the new anti-BDS bill. But this failed to stop the moral arc from bending towards justice. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from jail, and within a few years, apartheid was formally abolished. Mandela elected the country's first black president in 1994. Today, many British leaders express regret for the UK's support for the apartheid regime. But on Palestine, they have yet to draw the right lesson.
We take this opportunity once more to pay tribute to the millions of Britons who through the years, and like others everywhere else in the world, stood up to say no to apartheid.